Hey team, this is Grant David Collins and welcome to Basement Philanthropy, a place for people who do not want to wait until they're rich or retired to create meaning, impact, and connection with their time, talents, and money, regardless of the amount. On this episode, we're going to be exploring what it's like to have a career in the giving space, so let's get started. I first met Lissie and Tamsyn on a cold November evening in late 2022. We had all just finished contributing to a service project to put bags on doors for a local food drive, and all of us were pretty freezing. So we headed back to the meeting place to get some hot chocolate, and with a hot cup in hand, I walked up to the two of them to get to know them a little bit better. And after a few icebreaker questions, I realized that both of them worked in the nonprofit space, which was really intriguing to me because of the work that I do here at Basement Philanthropy. So a couple weeks later, I invited them out to dinner to hear about their stories. And as we were talking over pizza, I knew that they had to come on the podcast and share them with you. So I'm really excited for this episode to be able to give you some space on your side to think through your career. Is it meaningful? Is it fulfilling? And is there a way that either from a full-time or a part-time or a volunteer perspective, you can start incorporating the work of nonprofits into your professional career? Now, to get started, I wanted to take them back in time and ask them the question, when they were children, what did they want to be when they grew up?
It's funny because I didn't have like one answer. I feel like I went through phases, and I feel like part of that is kind of the family I grew up in.
Okay.
So I had parents that had a lot of hobbies and kind of encouraged that in their kids too. So I don't know, like I was really into drawing for a while, and I was like, I'm going to be an illustrator. And then I was into fashion design for a while, and I was going to be a fashion designer. So for a while there, it was just, pursuing these different things that interested me. And I was like, yeah, I could do that for work. I could make that my life. So yeah, there was no like underlying passion that was like, I'm going to be this from like day one. But as I like explored and learned and discovered different things, I think my interests gradually changed.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I grew up, I guess, in that way of it's okay to try different things and learn and then see what happens with it.
Nice. So. Yeah, when I was asked that question, I started out wanting to be a construction worker because I had this like VHS video that I watched. And it was like really cool people like driving trucks everywhere. I was like, this is amazing.
The dream.
And then I wanted to be a doctor because Dr. Collins, like there's a ring about it,
Yeah.
Turns out you shouldn't be a doctor because your name sounds cool. Yeah. So that was kind of my like iteration. I used to watch like heart surgery on YouTube. I don't know why.
Wow.
I want to be a heart surgeon. Then I like actually thought about it and was like, I don't want to do that anymore. What about you, Lissie?
I was always drawn to like dancing and singing. And I think that's probably mostly what I told people when they asked me when I wanted to grow up is like, I want to be a dancer. I want to be a singer. And I think that's mostly just, I think my perception of like people, when they grow up, they do what they're good at. And I was like, I'm a good dancer. I'm a good singer. Like, that's what I'm going to do. And I also thought like, you're just going to do what you enjoy. And so I've always just been like, well, I really love dancing. I'm going to do that. So I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I ever said. And like well into my adult life too. Like that's what I ended up studying was dance.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And at the same time as you all are working through this discovery that everybody goes through in their life, and from my perspective, it probably should continue as you go through your life. What about this concept of giving or service? Is that kind of a parallel track that starts to form, or is it kind of something that comes and goes? What kind of is the experience growing up around giving, service, philanthropy, whatever it is that you're exposed to?
I think for me, so I went on my first international trip when I had just graduated from high school.
Cool.
So I went to Europe. And I loved it. It changed my life. And so when I got back, I was starting college and I was looking at the list of majors, having no idea because, I had several different interests at that time.
Yeah.
There was a European studies major and I was like, that would be fun. That sounds interesting.
I love Europe.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my 2 weeks there. So why not study it? So I did that. And I think that whole program kind of exposed me to a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, and social problems that I had not experienced in my own life, but knew that other people were experiencing. And so that's kind of when the nonprofit sector kind of became real to me and why I knew it was necessary, or why it was needed. So I think my studies that started out as like, this is cool, this will be fun, kind of exposed me to those things and opened up the great things about humanity and also the problems that we have.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
And when you were on that initial trip, were you exposed to anything in that, or was it in your courses after or trips after that you started to see maybe the non-touristy side of the world?
I would say it started with my studies. I went on a study abroad to London too, and it was a sociology one. So we actually visited a couple different nonprofits, and we spent a lot of time talking about some of those complex social problems that happen in big cities, and actually seeing that firsthand. And like I said, we got to visit some of those nonprofits that were working in London. And there was one time we went to like Big Ben and there were all these life jackets out on the lawn. And we were like, what is this? And we found out it was life jackets that refugees had used on the crossing to get to Italy. And so we ended up talking to I can't remember which nonprofit it was, but some representative of that nonprofit. And I think that was probably one of the first times where I was like, wow, people do this for work. Like this is their job. They educate people about these problems and they work to solve these things. So that was probably one of the first times where I knew it could be a career.
Cool. Yeah. And was around the Syrian refugee crisis? Is that when that happened?
Yeah.
God, that had impact on a lot of people. That was one of the main things that got me kind of into the work too, was like hearing and seeing that. It's just devastating and something that kind of opened my eyes to the work. Lissie, what about you? And we don't have to go all the way to college. We can focus on earlier if that is where it is for you.
I can't say that it was earlier than college.
That's fine.
I wish I could. I don't think I ever thought too much about it, like some path where I could be working in the nonprofit space until I was in, it was in between. So I had graduated with my, Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance, was trying to dance professionally for local organizations, and a lot of them are nonprofit organizations. Local performance companies, I should say. And I remember being a part of a project where it was just structured a lot differently. It wasn't just like, let's choreograph the show and have people watch it, and it's just kind of more entertainment, but it was like a very interactive show, and we had elementary school classes come in and participate, and it was free to them. It was just like an experience for them to kind of get a chance to be creative and just participate in art and learn about art and the way that it can really bring people together. And really anybody can be good at dancing. Anybody can be good at like moving and being creative. And so that was like a unique experience for me. And I think it was a pivotal experience for me to realize how impactful art could be. I think that really is the first thing that really drew me to this idea of like making an impact through my work. I mean, I knew before then, like, art can be moving and it can really inspire people, but this was like so much more hands-on and more intentional, I felt like, in some ways, just because it was an immersive dance experience for these kids.
Interesting.
And I felt like it really empowered them as well at the same time. And usually audience members are just like sitting there and they can think about it and maybe they'll get something out of it or not. But
Yeah.
this was just different. And around that same time, so I was dancing professionally, but I was also working. I was working as a teacher because I couldn't, like, I had to make ends meet.
Yeah.
You know, like I wasn't making a lot of money as a just dancing. So, and I knew that it wasn't sustainable. Like I needed to figure out something else other than doing these two different jobs. And I just like wasn't, like I just knew this wasn't it. Like there was something more. And that's when I started pursuing maybe going back to school, looking at grad programs. I had a really hard time letting go of dance. I had dedicated so much of my time to it. I had a hard time letting go of art in general, and thought, I'll just apply to this MFA program, MFA in dance, and I also applied to BYU's MPA program, so Master's in Public Administration. And I didn't end up getting into the MFA program. I was like, okay, I'll go the MPA route. And I really went into it thinking like, well, I can learn about nonprofits. Most, performing dance companies are nonprofit organizations. Maybe
Right.
that's how I can like still hold on to dance and art, is just like more work on like the administrative side of things and just kind of learn about how to run a nonprofit. And I think, I guess during my studies in the grad program is when I was really opened my eyes to nonprofit work and seeing myself in it in lots of different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to kind of dive into some of the education side of things where you both ended up coming together a little bit more and becoming friends. But before, something that really struck me about what you just said was this concept of like audience versus like the performer. And I think it's a really good analogy for what often happens in the nonprofit sector, where we have these donors who are kind of quote unquote the audience, and we have the performers who are like the people that are working for nonprofits or the people that are getting affected by them. And there's like this, the third wall or whatever it's called in acting that we don't break, quote unquote. And what was interesting about what you said was that it was in breaking that you started to recognize like, hey, there's something that can be done when I start to mix these talents or these things that I have with people. And in your case, like elementary school kids, exposing them to art, getting them to move, those types of things can be very impactful for somebody. And I think that that's a really interesting way to look at giving and service as well, is if we look at it from a distance perspective and say like, hey, like you have your place, we have our place. I think that is when it isn't very impactful. But when we look for ways to like cross those, it can impact both sides. And I think that's the cool thing about what you just talked about. You're a performer and you are interacting with the audience. And that's what kind of causes you to say, maybe there's something here.
Yeah.
So you all become friends, you're working through the program, and maybe one thing that may be interesting to people as they're listening to this is, from an education standpoint, what do you feel like the education did for you? Was it more just like an introduction to give you frameworks to work around thinking about giving and service? What did you gather from that outside of like what people get in any type of education?
So much.
Yeah, I feel like it really was like all of it. Like I didn't know a lot about nonprofits going into this program, to be honest. I hadn't worked for any really other than being a performer. But I feel like they taught me not only like the structure of nonprofits and how they come together and how they should be run. But yeah, and then I think that first year I was learning a lot about just like all the different kinds, and what it can look like, how like both small and very large. And then into the second year, I feel like they really did a good job of teaching us how to, be effective as a nonprofit. I think a lot of them are just always trying to keep their head above water and maybe they have a great vision and mission, but they just can't bring it to fruition. And so I think I learned a lot of practical skills in
And they gave us a lot of opportunities to interact directly. Like we did a lot of projects for nonprofits. So we were actually doing work and seeing people implement some of the things that we were providing for them. And so it was great to like make connections with nonprofits, gain the skills, the knowledge. And I feel like a lot of people went into our program wanting to do different things, and either because it was public sector and nonprofit. So people were doing local government, things like that too.
Yeah.
So a lot of transition in our cohort where people were either moving away from nonprofits or towards them. So, yeah, I think it was very educational in a lot of ways.
Nice.
Yeah.
So as you're working through this, how do you then start to get to where you both landed right now, as far as like where you both are working?
So I work for the Red Cross now. I'm on their development team, like the Utah, Nevada region, and I do a lot of data stuff and manage volunteers. And if you had told me before I did the program that I'd be doing data stuff, I'd be like, that doesn't sound like me. So I think that
European
was
studies.
a bit of a dramatic change.
Yeah,
but
sure.
that was one thing that the program did give me was those hard skills.
Oh, cool.
Excel spreadsheets, great at using those now.
Yeah.
So I think realizing I could do work in the nonprofit sector with a specialized skill.
Yeah.
That's really what the program gave me. And it wasn't necessarily like my first choice, but it was something I knew I could do and I could do well. So
Yeah.
that's where I am now.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's interesting that as a society, we often put nonprofits in a different sector as other businesses. Like, oh yeah, like they're doing their stuff and you don't really have to be super competent. And when it's like the exact opposite, right? Like you need all of the things that you need to be a successful business, to be a successful nonprofit. And like, in a lot of ways, it's more important work than, selling some widget to somebody. And oftentimes there is a little bit maybe of a pay discrepancy, but the skill set that's needed to operate these areas efficiently is the same, if not greater, than in like a private commercial setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was something that I was really curious about as we have talked a little bit, Tamsyn, is just hearing about how, the Red Cross is a huge nonprofit, a lot of different things that they're involved with, right?
So is that the biggest? I didn't know.
The biggest, like the international, largest
okay.
international network. Yeah.
Yeah. So they definitely have their stuff together. But that was really interesting for me to hear a little bit more about, is that, your job description sounds very similar to what could be at any other company. It's just focused in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is maybe a misconception that you just mentioned that nonprofits, it's just kind of these people doing good work, doing service, but there are needs for people who can manage a business, who can do program evaluation, who can implement programs, be managers. So that was, our program is in the business school for a reason. So
yeah. What about you, Lissie? What did you end up getting into and how did you get there?
So I work for One Refugee. I'm an education manager. So they're a nonprofit organization that helps refugee college students get their bachelor's degrees.
Cool.
And I got there. So, before starting the MPA program, I never would have thought I'd be working. I just really thought I would be working in the nonprofit arts sector. But my first semester of the program, I was introduced to One Refugee. I volunteered to help One Refugee. Well, I didn't actually know. I just volunteered to be on a team to practice some skills we were learning in class.
Got it.
And they assigned me to this team, and we were working with One Refugee. And I just really enjoyed that experience. It was just loved practicing skills I was learning in class, but also just loved learning about this organization and felt like they just really trusted us. And I don't know. Anyways, great experience. And then a little bit later, saw that they were hiring for an intern. And I was like, well, I got to do an internship. Like, it was basically a requirement of our program.
Yeah.
So I applied, got it, and loved my internship. Still, this whole time, though, I was pretty set on like working in the nonprofit arts sector again, because I just had a hard time letting go of my past.
Yeah.
So, but I just really enjoyed it. Loved the people I was working with. Loved their cause. They just really believed in it, and I really feel like they just do such a good job of making the impact that they're trying to.
Yeah.
And then, but then, like, I think towards the end of our last year in the program, you know, I'm definitely looking into like arts organizations to work for and talking to some. And it never felt right. It never felt like a good fit. And the more I like looked into it, the less interested I became. And I just always looked back fondly on working for One Refugee, and just knew like I would be so comfortable there and so happy there. Like, despite it being completely different, like completely different cause than I saw myself working for, I just knew that it felt like it could be a really fulfilling and good fit for me. Like, I felt confident in being able to do a good job there. And then luckily they were hiring pretty soon after I graduated. There were some stressful months of like, are they going to be hiring? And then they were. And yeah, gratefully they gave me this position.
Yeah. So day to day, Tamsyn, you're involved with kind of the data, the volunteer organization, kind of feedback that the Red Cross has. And then on your end, Lissie, you're actually working with these individuals who are getting their bachelor's degree as kind of a coach or a support.
Yeah, like a mentor. Yeah, my main role is being like an academic mentor for these college students. I meet with them one-on-one at least once a month, and just helping them. They're all coming from, you know, different backgrounds and have different familiarity with the U.S. education system. So it really ranges what I'm helping them with, but really just being somebody they can go to for any questions, any help. Yeah.
There are a lot of myths or misunderstandings around nonprofits. And I'm wondering if we had a little bit of a conversation before this where we texted a little bit about questions. I'm wondering if anything came up, and if nothing came up, it's fine. But I'm wondering if like things came to your mind as like, oh yeah, if I could tell the world something about nonprofits or prove something wrong or speak into something, this is what I would want to say.
I think we kind of addressed some of the things I was thinking about. For example, the need for skilled workers and specialized workers who get paid a fair wage. And I think there is kind of a stigma against maybe like top leaders in nonprofits getting paid well. And I think people think, well, they're doing work that's funded by donors, they shouldn't be getting paid the same as maybe people in the private sector. But I think if nonprofits want to attract skill who can implement those programs in the most effective way, they do need to pay people well. So I think that's one thing. And we were talking, we've been in this space for a while now, so it's kind of hard to think about the outside view, like what people's perceptions are. So, but I think that still is one that is pretty common. So
yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but there's this kind of administrative burden that is put out a lot of times as far as like, make sure that your dollar is going the farthest and that most of it's not going to admin. And I mean, that's legit in some ways. Like there are nonprofits that aren't run very well and that, you know, there's bad actors in every space. But I think that sometimes as a population, we put that out there as like, oh man, if 40 cents of your dollar is going to admin, then it's not a good nonprofit to donate to, which is just not true, because like if 40 cents is going to admin that is using the other 60 cents effectively, or they need it in order to get the goods, you know, there's so many different things that happen. Like, yes, like you have to pay for those types of things. And I think that that's something that sometimes bothers me about the way that we look at impact when we don't have actual eyes on it. I think it's a fair critique, but it is only a critique in certain scenarios and shouldn't be used as like this copy and paste in every interaction that we're doing.
Amen. Yeah.
Preach it.
Another misconception I was thinking about is I think a lot of people perceive like people who work for nonprofits to have these like bleeding hearts and that their work really, maybe don't have a great work-life balance. Like it always bleeds into their personal life as well, or just kind of takes over. And that I think people also perceive that there's a lot of like burnout with employees working for nonprofits, which I think is the case for sure in some organizations. But I mean, my experience has been, and I've not only just with One Refugee, but also just like friends I have that work for nonprofits, and just also, working with nonprofits while I was in school. I think that's just not the case. I think it's very similar to other jobs. I like go to work 9 to 5, and then I'm done. And I, have a boss who really cares about my well-being, and it doesn't expect me to do more than what I signed on to do. And so I think that's another misconception maybe.
Yeah. It's, if for anybody that is listening that is not finding their career to be fulfilling, like I just probably would just invite people to just consider that their skill set could be used in the nonprofit space, and that there are jobs that are fairly paid and are in areas of great impact that could really be, their talents could really be useful in that area. And with some of those misconceptions, sometimes people don't even apply or even think about that as a space. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to do it, but at the same time, like include that in your job search or in your search for meaning or fulfillment or your next career move. Like consider a nonprofit in that, because they are so impactful, and there is such a great need in all areas of the work. Well, I just have loved our interaction outside of today, and especially today as we've kind of talked through different things. It's so valuable for me to have people like you two in my life that can shed some light on some of these things that really you just can't have a really good understanding until you get involved. And so, next time hot chocolate is available, like you're going to be looking around for the people that that seem like they
two little
are
introverts.
nonprofits. They have it like written on their faces. We like people. Well, team, that's it for me. Let's go out in the world and create good with the money, time, and resources that we all have to share, and maybe think about doing it as a career together. Talk soon.